The cry cut through the fog like a blade, and every living thing in the ravine froze before the human even turned around. Eli Navarro had been cataloging moss when the sound hit him, a thin, tearing wail that didn't belong to any database entry in the Coalition's xenobiology archive. It was too high to be a threat call, too desperate to be territorial, and it carried the unmistakable hitch of pain. Eli straightened slowly, one gloved hand still hovering over a sample vial, and felt the ground vibrate beneath his boots. The vibration wasn't from the cry itself but from the response to it, dozens of heavy bodies shifting in the mist, claws rasping against stone, breath huffing in low, synchronized pulses. He was not alone, and he had just wandered into the nursery of the most efficient pack predator yet discovered by sentient life. The Carracks were the reason this planet had earned the Coalition designation of restricted deathworld. They hunted in coordinated packs, communicated with infrasonic growls that scrambled most nervous systems, and possessed a social bond so fierce that even survey drones avoided areas marked with their scent. Eli knew all of this academically, the way one knows that a star will crush you if you fall into it. Knowing did very little to stop his pulse from spiking when the fog parted enough to reveal glowing amber eyes arranged in a crescent around him. Another cry rang out, closer this time, and Eli's gaze dropped to the source. A cub lay tangled in the exposed roots of a crystal-bark tree, one hind leg twisted at an angle that made Eli's stomach clench. The cub was all oversized paws and soft downy fur, its fierce scent sharp even through the filters of Eli's helmet. It thrashed weakly, making the injury worse, and each movement drew a ripple of agitation from the watching pack. "Oh," Eli whispered, the word useless and small. He raised his hands slowly, palms out, a gesture that meant nothing to aliens but everything to his own racing mind. He could retreat, he told himself. He could step back, mark the coordinates, and report a hostile encounter like protocol demanded. The pack would tend to its wounded or tear it apart according to its own rules, and Eli would live. The cub screamed again, and something old and stubborn in Eli snapped into place. The Carrack's alpha emerged from the fog, towering and scarred, its crest ridged with old battle marks. Its gaze locked onto Eli with an intelligence that made every instinct in his body scream to run. The alpha growled, a low, rolling sound that pressed against Eli's chest like a physical weight. Warning. Final. Absolute. Eli swallowed and did the least sensible thing he could imagine. He stepped forward. The reaction was immediate. The pack surged as one, claws digging furrows in stone, teeth flashing white. Eli felt his knees threaten to buckle, but he forced himself to keep moving, slow and deliberate, eyes fixed not on the alpha but on the cub. "Easy," he murmured, voice trembling despite himself. "I see you. I know it hurts." He knelt beside the cub, close enough now to see the tremor in its breathing, the way its eyes tracked every motion with raw terror. The alpha's growl deepened, vibrating Eli's bones. One wrong move and he would be torn apart before he could even scream. The cub lashed out weakly, claws scraping Eli's suit. Pain sensors flared, but Eli ignored them. He extended one hand careful, letting the cub sniff his glove. Its cry hitched, confused by the unfamiliar scent, and in that heartbeat of hesitation Eli acted. He placed his hand gently but firmly on the cub's shoulder and bellowed. The sound that tore out of Eli's chest wasn't language or reason. It was a roar dragged up from somewhere deeper than training, deeper than fear, a sound his ancestors had used to challenge storms and beasts, and the dark itself. It echoed off the ravine walls, raw and defiant, carrying a promise of protection and violence in equal measure. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The pack halted mid-surge, claws frozen inches from the ground. The alpha's eyes widened, pupils flaring as the roar washed over them, vibrating the fog and the stones and the air itself. In that suspended moment, Eli realized with a shock that the Carracks understood exactly what he had done. He hadn't challenged them. He had declared guardianship. Silence followed, heavy and stunned. Eli's heart hammered so hard he thought it might rupture, but he didn't pull his hand away from the cub. The cub, sensing the shift, went still, its breathing easing as Eli carefully adjusted the twisted limb. He worked quickly, hands steady despite everything, splinting the leg with strips from his medkit, murmuring nonsense comforts the way his grandmother used to when he was small. The alpha stepped closer, each movement measured. It lowered its massive head until its breath washed over Eli, hot and sharp with teeth and warning. Eli met its gaze, fear screaming, resolve louder. "I won't hurt it," he said, voice hoarse. "I swear." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the alpha exhaled and sat back on its haunches. The pack followed, a ripple of motion settling into wary stillness. The cub whimpered softly, no longer in agony, and leaned into Eli's touch. Eli sagged with relief he didn't dare show. He was kneeling in the heart of a predator pack on a death world, bound by a challenge he hadn't fully understood, with no idea how he would get out alive. But the cub was no longer screaming, the pack was no longer attacking, and for now, that was enough to keep him breathing. The first thing Eli noticed was that the fog had thickened, turning the ravine into a gray soup where shapes emerged and disappeared like phantoms. Every movement in the mist carried weight now, the faint snap of a branch, the scuff of claws on stone, the low growl of a predator evaluating him with renewed interest. The cub, huddled against his chest, pressed its small body into him as if sensing that the pack's tension had shifted but not vanished. Eli's own pulse pounded against his ribs, a constant drumbeat reminding him that he was still very much alive and very much on borrowed time. He had thought that the roar, that one instinct-driven claim of guardianship, would buy him some peace, maybe even curiosity from the pack. Instead, it had merely opened the door to a new challenge, navigating a pack whose alpha now regarded him not as prey but as a potential rival or, worse, an unpredictable anomaly. Eli had no manuals for this. No protocol could cover the sudden escalation from human observer to protector of Carrick's young. He had been trained in xenobiology, not interspecies diplomacy in life-or-death scenarios. The fog shifted, revealing movement farther down the ravine. Eli squinted, eyes straining against the haze, and caught sight of several juvenile Carricks emerging from the mist. They were bigger than the cub he held but smaller than full-grown predators, awkward, lanky, and clearly curious. Their amber eyes tracked him, heads tilting in silent evaluation. One step forward, tentative, its claws scraping the ground in a soft rhythm. The pack had now divided, some members close to the alpha maintaining a tight circle around him, others moving like scouts, testing the limits of Eli's strange presence. A low growl rumbled from behind him, and Eli turned just in time to see the alpha rise, muscles rippling, a warning to its own that he was not to be trifled with. He could feel the tension in the air, dense enough to taste, the electricity of instincts honed over millennia, the silent coordination of a group whose survival depended on trust and ruthless efficiency. Eli took a deep breath, forcing his mind to focus. Survival meant understanding, not dominance, not escape, but understanding the rhythms of this pack. He shifted slightly, allowing the cub to rest against a rock while he raised his hands again, palms outward. "I'm not your enemy," he murmured, voice low, controlled, careful. The alpha's gaze followed every subtle motion, pupils narrowing and widening as if weighing the sincerity of the claim. The juveniles in the mist mirrored the tension, circling closer, sniffing the air with cautious curiosity. Eli realized he was in uncharted territory. This was not just observation. He was a variable in an ecosystem that had no concept of mercy for mistakes. A sudden screech cut through the fog, high-pitched and discordant, and Eli flinched. One of the scouts had discovered something, perhaps another predator, perhaps prey, perhaps a rival pack member. The reaction from the alpha was instantaneous, a guttural command that reverberated in the very stones beneath his feet. The pack tightened, forming a semicircle that framed Eli and the cub. The cub whimpered again, instinctively curling into him, and Eli's mind raced for solutions. He couldn't fight them. He couldn't run without provoking a chase. And he certainly couldn't leave the cub behind. That left one option: engage on their terms. He had read enough behavioral studies to know that nonverbal communication, posture, tone, rhythm, mattered immensely. He lowered himself to one knee, keeping his profile non-threatening, and let out a controlled series of sounds, low hums, short hisses, subtle vibrations of breath that mimicked some of the Carax's vocal patterns. His body tensed, ready to respond if the Alpha interpreted this as aggression, but something remarkable happened. The scouts halted their forward movement. The juveniles tilted their heads, ears flicking. The Alpha exhaled sharply, a signal of tentative acknowledgement rather than compliance. Eli felt a sliver of leverage. He used that moment to take inventory of their surroundings. The ravine wasn't just fog and rock. There were crystalline growths jutting from the walls, fissures in the ground that could be used for cover or for climbing, and scattered debris from previous storms that might serve as obstacles. His brain began to map possibilities. He could move slowly along the crystal formations to maintain distance. He could use the vertical surfaces to gain visibility. He could keep the cub protected by positioning himself as a physical barrier. Every instinct screamed caution, but a sharper one reminded him of something crucial. The Carax were intelligent, social, and adaptable. They could be reasoned with, at least enough to survive, perhaps even to coexist temporarily. The Alpha's growl deepened, punctuated by sharp clicks. Eli froze, reading the cadence like a. It was a challenge, not a threat, not an immediate attack, but a test of resolve and dominance. He met the gaze without flinching, voice low, almost reverent. I'm staying. I protect it. That is all. The Alpha's ears twitched, the fur along its ridge bristling, but the growl didn't escalate. The juveniles edged closer, curiosity outweighing fear, their claws scraping softly against stone. Eli sensed a fragile truce forming, contingent on his ability to remain calm, deliberate, and unerringly protective of the cub. A distant rumble interrupted his focus, a seismic tremor, small but noticeable, sending microshocks through the ground. The Alpha's head shot toward the source, nostrils flaring. Eli realized that he had not only gained the attention of this pack but had also become a participant in a larger, dynamic ecosystem, one with unseen dangers. The tremor was likely minor, but on a planet like this, minor disturbances could trigger predator ambushes, rock slides, or the emergence of territorial rivals. Eli had no choice but to adapt, to think faster than the average human ever had to on Earth. His mind raced through options: climb higher, find natural barriers, use the cub as a shield, or, perhaps more daringly, position himself as the decoy to draw attention away from the youngling. He decided on the latter. Slowly, deliberately he stood, allowing the cub to cling to his shoulder like a feathered burden. He moved toward the mist, careful to maintain eye contact with the Alpha, to project confidence without aggression. The juveniles mirrored him, hesitant but watchful. The Alpha followed, its massive form fluid and controlled, muscles rippling with every step. The fog thickened, and with it, a sense of shared tension that made every breath feel heavier, every movement louder. Then a scream pierced the air, a sound alien and jagged, echoing unnaturally. The Alpha flinched, the pack stiffened, and Eli felt the hair along his arms rise. The scream was not from the cub or his immediate surroundings. It came from deeper within the ravine, a predator beyond the pack, a force that could shatter alliances and provoke chaos. Eli's mind went into overdrive. He had to act quickly. The cub's frightened squirm reinforced the urgency. Every instinct screamed retreat, every piece of training screamed strategic response, and every ounce of courage screamed one simple truth: survive, protect, adapt. Eli let out a controlled roar, not as raw as before, but deliberate, layered with meaning. Protect. Threat. Warning. The Alpha halted, ears flicking, eyes narrowing, then pivoted to assess the source of the scream. The juveniles froze. The cub clung tighter. In that suspended moment, Eli realized that he had bought them time, a fragile buffer in which he could think, plan, and act. But the balance was delicate. One misstep could unravel the temporary truce, trigger the pack's predatory instincts, and turn him from guardian to prey. The mist swirled, the fog danced, and Eli's mind raced. He was not merely navigating a predator pack anymore. He was navigating the laws of survival on a death world, using only his wits, instincts, and the fragile bond he had formed with one injured cub. The scream echoed again, closer this time, and Eli knew the real test had just begun. Survival would demand every ounce of cunning he possessed. The cub's life depended on it. And somehow, he knew, the pack was about to force him to confront dangers far beyond anything he had encountered in his studies or imagined in simulations. The scream tore through the fog like a lightning strike, louder and more jagged this time, and Eli's stomach dropped as his eyes searched the mist for the source. Something massive was moving, faster than anything he had ever seen, and the vibrations in the ground told him instinctively that this was not a juvenile Carex or even a rival pack. It was a completely alien predator, one that moved with terrifying intelligence and lethal precision. Eli clutched the cub closer, hard hammering, and realized the fragile truce he had carefully cultivated could collapse in an instant. The alpha shifted, low growl resonating like a drum, muscles tensing, signaling readiness for battle. The mist parted enough to reveal a creature that seemed to have stepped out of a nightmare. Its body was angular, armored in iridescent plates that reflected the sparse light like shards of glass. Multiple limbs ended in sharp talons, and its mouth, a gaping maw lined with serrated teeth, emitted a piercing shriek that rattled Eli's bones. The Carex pack tensed, a unified wave of movement that signaled both fear and strategic assessment. The cub squeaked, pressing its head into Eli's chest, and in that moment he understood the stakes. One wrong move and this world would claim him, the cub, or both. Eli had no choice. He could not run. Retreat meant exposing the cub. He could not fight. The predator would overwhelm him in moments. He needed a strategy, and fast. Drawing on every ounce of instinct and knowledge he had accumulated as a xenobiologist and survivor, he scanned the terrain. The crystalline formations, the jagged rocks, the natural fissures, all could be used to disrupt the predator's momentum or provide temporary cover. His eyes landed on a large outcrop slightly ahead, its surface sloping just enough to allow a controlled fall that might unbalance the creature. He rose, placing the cub securely against his shoulder, and let out a deliberate roar. This time, it wasn't just a protective signal. It was a challenge, a declaration of intent. The alpha mirrored him immediately, letting out a resonant growl that echoed off the stone walls. For a moment, predator met predator, and Eli felt a surge of something he had never experienced, the raw, unspoken bond between human and apex predator, an understanding born not of language but of shared stakes. The alien predator responded, lunging forward with terrifying speed. Eli ran toward the outcrop, placing his weight carefully to avoid slipping on the slick stones. The Carex followed, flanking him with calculated precision, their claws scraping the rock as they moved. Eli's mind raced. He needed to buy seconds, create confusion, and use the pack's instincts to his advantage. With a sudden pivot, he leapt onto the outcrop, sliding down its surface with the cub still clinging to him. The alien screeched, crashing into the formation with a force that sent shards of crystal scattering. The Carex were immediate in their response. They didn't attack recklessly. Instead, they worked in perfect coordination. One juvenile circled behind the predator, drawing its attention, while the alpha pressed from the front. Eli found himself acting instinctively, adjusting his position, using every rock and ridge to guide the predator toward the pack's strategic placement. Each movement was a calculated risk. Too close, and he could be crushed. Too far, and the predator could escape and return with worse consequences. A jagged talon swiped past him, missing the cub by inches. Eli felt the rush of wind and the scent of alien blood, but he didn't falter. Instead, he let the predator's momentum guide it toward a narrow pass, a choke point where the Carex had positioned themselves like living barricades. The alpha and the juveniles lunged simultaneously, teeth and claws striking with precision, forcing the creature to stumble and reel. Eli used the opportunity to push off a rock, landing behind the predator and kicking at its armored flanks. The creature howled in confusion and pain, its shrieks blending with the growls and roars around it. But the challenge was far from over. The alien was smart, far smarter than anything Eli had faced before. It adapted quickly, twisting midair, slashing at the Carex with blinding speed. One of the juveniles yelped as a talon grazed its side, and Eli's stomach lurched. He couldn't let them die. Thinking quickly, he grabbed a loose crystal shard from the ground, a jagged piece that reflected light in chaotic patterns, and swung it toward the predator's eyes. The glint momentarily blinded it, and the alpha seized the opportunity, leaping and sinking its teeth into the creature's flank. Eli stumbled but recovered, heart racing as he realized the predator was beginning to falter. It hissed, claws scraping, as the pack's coordinated attacks began to take effect. Yet even weakened, it was lethal, thrashing wildly, forcing Eli to dodge and redirect the cub's small, frightened movements. Each second stretched into an eternity, and the realization hit him: survival wasn't just about strength, it was about timing, intuition, and using every resource at his disposal, including the unpredictable cooperation of an alien apex predator pack. Then came a critical moment. The alien, with one final desperate swipe, struck a fissure in the ground, sending rocks tumbling down the slope. Eli's heart stopped as he realized that a misstep could send him, the cub, or the Carex plummeting into jagged stone below. Acting on pure instinct, he grabbed a larger rock and used it to wedge the alien against the outcrop, limiting its movement. The Carex surged together, teeth and claws pinning the creature, their growls rising into a symphony of controlled ferocity. The predator roared one final time, a sound that echoed off the ravine walls, shaking the ground and rattling Eli's bones. Then, almost suddenly, it went still, panting and cornered but alive. The Carex Alpha stepped forward, teeth bared, growl low, assessing. Eli held his breath, chest tight, praying that the fragile truce would extend to this moment. The Alpha sniffed the alien, then Eli, then the cub. After a tense pause, it stepped back, ears flicking, signaling that the immediate threat had been neutralized. Eli sagged, relief flooding him in waves, and glanced down at the cub, which had been trembling against his chest. It whimpered softly but allied the packs. The mist finally began to lift, revealing the fractured terrain, and the alien predator pinned against the jagged rocks. Eli's muscles screamed in protest, every nerve ending still tingling from the adrenaline surge. The cub had stopped trembling, its small, warm body pressed firmly against his chest, eyes wide but trusting. The Carex pack circled, tense but alert, like sentinels who had agreed to an unspoken truce. Eli knew that the true test was not just surviving the immediate threat but ensuring that the fragile balance he had created endured, and that meant guiding the pack, the cub, and himself through the unpredictable dangers ahead. A low hum in the distance drew Eli's attention, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, then building into a rhythm that resonated through the rocks and fog. The Alpha stiffened, ears flicking toward the source, muscles coiled. Eli squinted, trying to locate the origin, and realized that the sound wasn't natural. It was mechanical, an automated survey drone, probably malfunctioning, sending out pulses that could confuse or agitate the predators. If the pack responded aggressively, it could trigger chaos, especially with the cub in the middle. He needed a solution fast. Eli crouched, placing the cub on his shoulders so it could see and breathe, while keeping his body low to signal non-threat. He extended one hand, mimicking the Alpha's posture, and let out a series of controlled vibrations, half roar, half hum, a sound pattern he hoped the pack would interpret as guidance rather than aggression. The Alpha's ears twitched, and after a tense heartbeat, it mirrored the motion, letting out a low, rolling growl that seemed to harmonize with Eli's tones. One by one, the juveniles followed, a chorus of amber-eyed obedience that seemed almost surreal. The drone's pulses grew stronger, and Eli's mind raced. He had to neutralize the threat without harming the pack or provoking panic. Scanning the terrain, he spotted a crystalline outcrop nearby, fractured but stable. If he could lure the drone's signals toward it, the resulting interference might confuse its sensors and shut it down temporarily. He gestured subtly to the Alpha, guiding it toward the outcrop, using the pack's natural curiosity and coordinated instincts as an extension of his own strategy. As they approached, the Alpha led the way, muscles rippling, eyes locked on Eli's movements. The juveniles followed, and the cub chirped softly, leaning against Eli's chest. The drone hovered closer, its sensors scanning, unaware that it had walked into a trap of sorts. Eli shifted, creating shadows and movement patterns that drew the drone's attention toward the crystalline formation. Then, With a calculated kick, he dislodged a shard of crystal, sending it clattering down onto a reflective surface. The drone's sensors misread the signals, its thrusters compensating erratically. The pack reacted instantly. The alpha bounded toward the confused drone, teeth bared, and the juveniles flanked it, creating a coordinated barrier. The drone whirred, its lights flashing erratically, before finally spinning out of control and crashing against the rock wall, sparks flying. Eli exhaled sharply, realizing that his gamble had worked. The pack remained unharmed, the cubs safe, and the immediate environmental threat neutralized. But Eli knew this victory was temporary. The planet was alive with dangers, predators, environmental hazards, and unknown forces beyond even his understanding. He had learned, in a heartbeat, that brute force would rarely suffice. Strategy, improvisation, and the ability to read both alien behavior and environmental cues were paramount. And as he adjusted the cub, brushing dust from its fur, he realized that the Carracks were no longer just obstacles or threats. They were allies, if tenuous ones, capable of coordinated action that complemented his own. They moved together through the ravine, Eli guiding, the pack flanking,